Hello, folks. It is 1 minute before noon here in the Mountain Time Zone. We have a bunch of people joining right now. We will give them a moment to get settled, and we'll be getting started momentarily. I will mention that we will be watching the chat window. So we encourage your participation in that chat window, or in that chat, I should say. We have a good group today. I know we've got both a good number, not too large, size that we can get to your questions most likely, and at the same time, we're also going to have, I think, a wide range of perspectives that we look forward to hearing from as well. So I'll encourage you also to comment as well as asking questions. We're certainly looking forward to your questions, but we welcome your comments as well. And I'll actually start by suggesting if you could all use the chat window to tell us a little bit about who you are and maybe what organization, school, district, otherwise you're with, where you are joining us from, and if there's any particular item you'd like to get out of this discussion today, any question that you have coming into this, we certainly welcome that as well. My clock has ticked over to 1 minute past high noon, coming to you from Western Colorado, Durango, Colorado. We have folks joining from various parts of the country today. My name is John Watson. Thrilled to be on with the folks from StrongMind and from iSucceed to have this discussion about how data is used in the online learning environment. The reason that I really love this topic is because as long as I've been in this field, which is quite a while, one of the things that you hear people say is, well, one of the benefits of online learning and educational technology, even more broadly, is the availability of quote unquote data. And if you're like me, you've probably heard a line like that many times in your career, at conferences and webinars, at meetings. A lot of people actually really struggle to get into what that really means. And in fact, at times I feel like I've asked the follow-up, okay, tell me what you mean. What does that mean? What kind of data are you using and to what end? And sometimes it just feels like the word data gets repeated like a mantra instead of actually explaining how it's used and to what end and how it improves student outcomes. It's clear that data are available in these technology-rich environments and in online learning environments, but it's not clear how those data can really be best used, and in some cases, if they're really being used at all. So in addition to the data as a mantra, I also get the sense that a lot of times the discussion is around, well, here are all the things that you can do with data. And I want to turn that around and say, let's hear what you are doing with student data. And so that's why I'm thrilled to be hosting this webinar with the team from iSucceed and StrongMind. I've known the folks at iSucceed for a lot of years, going back to, it was well pre-pandemic when I had the opportunity to visit the school, learn more about what they were doing, and hearing some of what you're going to hear about today. Instead of taking up more time with my own impressions, I'm going to go to the source, call onto the webinar Katie Allison, who's the executive director of iSucceed, and Clayton Trehall from iSucceed as well. Both of them are going to be talking about what they're doing at iSucceed. Later on, we're going to be bringing on some other folks from iSucceed and from StrongMind as well. But with that, I'm going to go to Katie and Clayton. Katie, start with you.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to give you just an overview of our school and then also talk about the key things that led us down this path and how we use data and how we use that for program improvement and very much on a daily basis. So a little bit about iSucceed. iSucceed Virtual Schools is an online charter in the state of Idaho. We started out serving grades 9 through 12. We started in 2008, so we've been around for 15 years. We've been through a lot of different structures. We started out as a school that was run as an EMO, and we are now an independent school. And actually, part of our story is what we did when we went from EMO to independent and some of the things that were happening at the same time in the landscape of accountability. So for us, we've had quite the journey. So part of where we landed and where we are today, a lot of that harkens back to that time period. So when we were in EMO, we had a company that was running things for us, doing a lot of data for us, had systems in place. However, at the same time, the state accountability and the federal accountability was different. This was No Child Left Behind, and our state accountability for charters was just in the making here in Idaho. So as we went through the circumstance of moving from EMO led to an independent with a service provider, and StrongMind has been our service provider since 2012, we had also at the same time a very heavy pressure on us, like other states across the nation, for online school accountability. And a lot of that was focused on measures that were often more in common with traditional schools and for stable populations, and not really meaningful to the online schools. And some of us are still dealing with that to this day in many of the states. So one of the things we found at that beginning was we had a problem. We had accountability placed on us. We had a charter commission that was very much telling us that our ISAT scores were low, our cohort grad rate was low, and the measures that they were giving us were very unmatched to the online environment, to our demographics, to the mobility of the students. And many of you know this story. This is a common story. So for us, we had a decision to make. We knew that we weren't going to be able to change state and Fed accountability in a very short period of time. We were stuck with that. But the reality was they were telling a story about our school that wasn't our true story. We were a school whose mission is very strong and our philosophy is strong, and we were just developing programs really to support that mission. And we decided we wanted to be able to be the storyteller, and we wanted to be able to pick data and information that we could really use and be meaningful to us. So it was a philosophical shift of the school. But the school was also very small at that time. So we had to start with a small group of people in our school leadership team. And over these years, it has expanded and has become very strong based on that premise. So part of that switch was us trying to decide what matters to us and what's relevant to our structure. So part of that was understanding our demographics. We have a lot of at-risk kids. We have a lot of kids who are marginalized. We have a lot of mobile students. So the switch for us, instead of looking at federal and state accountability that was a one size fit all, we looked at it and said, what can we do while the kid is with us? What can we do with these students when they're with us? What can we do with parents to help engagement? And we landed on two key, I would say, key focuses of our data. One is based on engagement of the student, and the other is based on academics. And those things work together, because if the student isn't engaged, their academics are going to be poor. So we decided to use that model to drive what we were doing. And another key element to this, which I know that, we often give the feds and the state a bad rap, but I will say we decided to take on a Title I program, which is not very common for a high school, especially an online high school, because Title I programs are very much more prevalent in the elementary schools and in traditional schools. But we decided to do this because we had that population. We had that population that needed those supports. And that was actually a key element to developing what we developed. However, what we developed was very unique. So I think that gives a little bit of the premise of why we did what we did. And, accountability drove that, but we were able to figure out what matters to us, what are the key things we have control of, and then start building it from there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Clayton, and he's going to give you the details of what we've developed along the way.
Okay, so I'll actually talk a lot about one of my favorite subjects, and that's student grade progress. But I'd first like to start with telling the story of why we're even doing this presentation. So Denise had reached out to us from StrongMind. She said, can you share some school data with us? We're writing up a story and we want to put something on there. And I shared a document that I call big picture grade data, and it shows things like credit attempted versus credit earned, average grade, course complete. And It goes back a long way, all the way back to 16, 17, because this is my 8th year at iSucceed, and we do quarters, not semesters. So we look at things every 9 weeks. And she emailed back and she said, "This is really good data. Would you guys, could we share more about this?" So that's how this began. And I wanted to tell that story because I really think, the thing when you think about state accountability and things like this, I think my biggest problem with the way that states judge school, they look at on a high school level, they look at graduation and they look at how did students do on a standardized test score. Well, whether you even support that or not, the biggest problem is this: you graduate once in 4 years of high school, you take a standardized test once in 4 years of high school, and that's just way too long to wait for data. Meanwhile, you earn grades every day and every week. And so when Denise reached out and she said, "How did you guys get these results?" I said, "Well, we really look closely at academic data. And if you think of a school, what is more important when you're doing school than a kid's grades and progress?" And I really can't think of anything that is more important. And talking about how we use data, in talking with other people, I think most people that I've talked to um, have the capability to run some kind of a report that will show where kids' grades are at a certain period of time, a certain moment in time, where their progress is at a certain moment of time. But how do you turn that into something that can improve your school? Well, if you think about this, if you run a report that shows kids' progress on one Monday, then run the same report the next Monday, what you have, if you subtract one from the other, is you have how much progress those kids got over the week. Now, that's important because if you know how much progress they need to make, and then you know how much they did make, you know if kids made it or not, and you can let them know if they didn't. Also, when you look at grade data, if you think about this, like again, we're in 9-week terms. So we have semester courses, but we put kids into 3 at a time. Over 18 weeks, they take 6 courses, but 3 at a time. So if you think about this, if a student is between 0 and say 29% in week 3 of a term, which is relatively towards the beginning of the term, that matters because those students, if a student has not really progressed more than that by week 3 of a 9-week term, they're probably not going to pass that course. So if you act on that data right at that moment, you actually can have a big impact on that kid. Also, if you're in the final week of a term, and let's say you have a student that has 85% in a course, I think everybody here, or most everybody here, are teachers. You know what you know about in the final week of the term. If you look at a kid who's at 85%, you're really looking at a student who is 3 or 4 assignments away from an A. And so if you reach out to that kid in week 9 of the term, in that final week, and you say, "You know what, you have 85%, and if you did 3 more assignments, you could probably walk out of this class with an A, not a B. Isn't it worth that to you?" That's actionable data. So what we've done over the years is we've relentlessly run all of these reports. Oh, the other one too, when you get to the end of a term, you're going to have a certain, you're going to have these final grades. Well, you're going to have a breakdown. How many A's, how many B's, how many C's, what was your pass ratio, what was all this? You can compare that term by term, and you can see if your school is moving up or down, and you can change policies on that. Just like if you looked at the end of the term and you averaged not by student or by school, but by course, you can actually see which courses kids are passing, which courses kids are failing, so you can use that. So that is one of the things we've done. And one of the first things that we did with this is we created something we call our attendance program. As Katie had mentioned, engagement is super, super important. So what we do at the beginning of a term, we tell kids, you're in this many courses, you have to do this many lessons, and you have this many weeks during the term, which equals out to about 10 lessons a week. Now, you've got from Monday through Sunday night to do that. If you don't do 10 lessons, we're going to send you an attendance notice. And it's not really attendance, it's attendance in quotes. But that word absent, attendance, those are power words. And just to kind of show you how effective this is, on a Friday morning when I run attendance out of our 1,000 kids that we have in high school, we typically have about 4,000 lessons done. Now, remember, attendance is not due until the next Monday morning. They've got till Sunday night at 11:59 to get their attendance done. When I rerun that same report on Monday morning, those same 1,000 kids are no longer at 4,000 lessons, they're at 8,000 lessons. And this is pretty typical because they know that we're going to check again on Monday, and they know that if they didn't quite reach that, they're going to get that absence notice. So that is what we do for attendance. In addition to this, we run student grade progress. It's basically a week by week thing. And I mentioned a couple of interventions that we do. I mentioned the 0 to 29%, and then I mentioned what we call the final intervention. At certain times during the quarter, we look and we group kids by certain grade buckets, and then we do things with those kids. Again, if you were part of the 0 to 29, your teacher would call you and say, hey, you know, you're a really low percent in this course, and we're in week 3, and we really need to get you going. And the whole goal of using this data and checking on it on a regular basis is just to get the kids going. And I'll wrap up what I was saying here, and just to say, we focused on this for years and years, and we're constantly going back as a school and saying, how can we do this a little bit better? How can we do this a little bit better? Does this intervention work, or do we need to tweak this intervention? Do we do this now, or do we do it later? And, you know, in 16-17, our credit earned percent, our pass rate, was around 50% that year. This year, or last year, where, you know, this year's just begun, our pass rate is now at 75%. When we look at our average grade in 16-17 was, you know, close to 53%. Our average grade now is closer to 76%. Our course complete way back in the day was 50% or less. Our average course complete now is 85%. And what's interesting when you look at our data, none of these changes happened immediately. It was things that ultimately it was slow change. One term we had a 2% increase, and the next term we had a 1% increase, and it just gradually built. And because we've used so many of the same systems over and over, we can constantly tweak and improve. So that's a little bit of the story of the data at our school.
I love what both of you have been talking about. Katie, as you were talking at the start, one of the things you said about your story, that the line occurred to me, somebody's going to tell your story. It's just a question of whether you're going to tell it or somebody else is. And Clayton, as you were talking, I was thinking about there's a colleague of mine who runs a school in Colorado who likes to say, you can use data to take a temperature or do an autopsy. And we'd like to take a temperature, to your point about a graduation rate. I am curious. I think this is a question more for you, Clayton, but Katie, certainly if you want to jump in, please do. And I see, Katie, you responding in the text chat. Thank you for that. But I am curious about the extent to which the ways in which you're setting up an instructional program that is creating the level of data that you're talking about, right? Because you're talking about weekly data collection around progress. And I'm pretty certain if I went into an average comprehensive high school and just did a like a classroom by classroom survey, you know, how much data a teacher has week to week is going to vary quite a bit, both in terms of what are the types of data, how are they generating it, what are they doing with it? And so one of the things that occurs to me is you're talking about it sounds to me like you're talking about a very systematized approach. And I wonder if you could talk more about that, and starting with, is what I'm suggesting roughly accurate, or am I wrong in some way about that?
No, I think you're totally right, John. And this is where I think we have an advantage in online. And I have to give great props to StrongMind, because, you know, we take it for granted. We have excellent curriculum. And we have over the years always had excellent information from them. And honestly, like they just keep getting better. And I feel Bonnie and Jason, I feel our team right now is the best we've ever had because you guys are awesome. And so they've been very reliable on that. But the advantage we have, I think, with online, and you know, this can be a struggle when you first start. Your entire course is built from day one in the system. So, you know, if you're trying to make modifications, you have to be on that. And that's what helps that data be systematic. So, for example, when kids are done with courses, if they finish, they're going to have 100% progress. And if you look week by week, you're going to see that, you know, week one, maybe they got 6% progress in the course. And week two, they're at 13%. And, you know, the kids are plodding along going forward. I think where it'd be harder in brick and mortar, and it would be harder to do that because I think in brick and mortar, you don't generally have 100% of your course set up in the system, in your student information system or your LMS where you're getting reports. You wouldn't have that. If you did, though, you could do the same thing. So I think where we have an advantage is the system is already, the whole course has already been laid out. And teachers can change, and it will incrementally change that course, but not in such a huge way to where it's radical.
I'm curious about when you talk about the setup that you have. And again, I'll put this question to either of you. One of the things that we hear about online students is their need for flexibility, whether it's for health reasons or because they're traveling. You know this better than I do, right? At the same time, there's always this tension around maximum scheduling flexibility and keeping tabs on what students are doing on a very regular basis. It sounds to me like iSucceed is really on the side of the continuum that's more very consistent check-ins, typically expectations for very consistent work delivery, assignments, attendance, all those things. Can you comment on that? Like, for instance, do you ever run into students who say, "What? No, wait," and parents maybe as well? Because I know the reason I did this, I'm in online is because I want to be away for this week, and I'm going to come back and make up 2 weeks after. What does that look like for you?
Well, first, kids can arrange absence. Oh, go ahead, Katie.
Go ahead, Katie. I should have directed that to one of you. Go ahead, Katie. You were nodding along.
I'll mention one thing, and I'm sure he's got a different point on it as well. But somebody in the chat asked about asynchronous and synchronous. So yes, absolutely. We get that comment. I joined, so it's flexible, and it is flexible. And we moved away from synchronous sessions for much of that reason, because they weren't really serving the purpose that it needed to serve, because we were not able to capture every student at the same time at the same place. So what we did to pivot from that is we have our teachers do video instruction. So what that is video clips. They're very intentional, and they are placed within the curriculum, so the student is accessing that at the time and place they need it. So, you know, that thought of doing a weekly session when you've got one student, you know, just starting and one student who's worked ahead. I mean, to some degree, the traditionals, you know, face that problem when they've got their daily lectures. But for us, we made that just in time. So basically, the students in week 2, even though it might be week 1, that information is there for them, and that guidance from the teacher through some of those assignments is there as well.
And do you are you gating the content in any way, or can a student hypothetically work several weeks ahead?
I'll let Clayton handle that.
Yes, they can. And that even goes to our attendance thing. So as far as how we take attendance, is really lesson completion, right? And we're saying we're not looking daily. Like, we don't ask kids, you got to log in every day. And we don't even care about that. We say what days you do those weekly lessons, what hours, you know, because you know how kids sometimes work through the night and we're all asleep. What days and hours you do that in, that's totally up to you. You just have to have this done by a certain time. And by the way, there's never any penalty if you don't. Like, there's no penalty for late work. If a kid gets a 0 on something and they want to fix that 0, they just go back and fix it. So there is that flexibility. Some kids want to do one course at a time. And by the way, our system is okay with that, because if you had to do 10 lessons a week and you were in 3 courses, you're probably doing about 3.3 lessons per course each week. Well, what if you just decided to do one course the entire week? Well, you just do 10 lessons in that course that week. The other thing too is you can arrange absences. And what we tell students and parents, if because they'll ask us about that. They'll say, well, what if we wanted to go camping? If you want to work ahead, then the system will never mark you absent. So you don't even have to arrange it. Or if you'd rather just call in and say, we're going to be gone this week, don't take attendance, we're just going to mark that on our system and we're not going to take it. And the other way we look at it too, it's not just about weekly lesson completion. If you're where you're supposed to be. So if let's say you had 10 lessons a week and you did 20 lessons in week 1 and then you did nothing in week 2. Well, you're actually exactly where you're supposed to be. We're not going to mark you absent because you're exactly where you're supposed to be. So it's really designed to help the student and the parent, not to punish them.
Final question, and then we're going to move on to a couple of the strongline folks, and then we're going to keep you on to answer some questions. I think I'll go to Katie with this question. A commenter in the chat window said our attendance and engagement are both monitored by the state. Let's talk attendance. So what Clayton just described. So I'm gonna say this in let's say a way that an online learning skeptic might say this, right? It sounds like what you just said is the student doesn't have to be engaged if they get ahead. But oh my gosh, we're paying students to show up. Like in all the brick and mortar schools, we're paying you to teach kids every day. Well, or I should say, we're paying you to make sure kids are sitting in a classroom every day.
Right.
How does that work with iSucceed and the state of Idaho and what you need to show them for attendance and accountability and funding purposes?
So I'll answer her question quickly. When Clayton says attendance, it's not the same as how the state monitors us. So he calls it attendance because that's a term that the students and parents understand.
And he mentioned that.
Yeah.
He called it that. I think he called it a power term. I love that.
Yeah. But it's similar. So the state for us for online, what they do is they either look at seat time, which could be somebody logging in and really sitting at a computer and not doing anything, or they look at progress in course. So typically that they take the higher of the two. So if you have worked ahead, your attendance level is going to be 100% for that year, for that week. So that's how the state looks at it. So they look at it a little differently, but what we do instead, when we say attendance, it's more about, are you on track for the week? Are you on track in the lesson completion? Therefore, when you get to the last week, you have all of your assignments in that were due. So it's really a call to action that we're using here, but we're using that attendance term because it is something that the students and parents understand.
Excellent. That makes total sense. Thank you. All right, we're at 25 minutes past the hour. I want to bring in a couple of other folks. I want to bring in Jason Tourville and Bonnie Coleman from StrongMind. Jason is data analyst, Bonnie senior manager for operation systems administration. And Jason and Bonnie, we heard Clayton and Katie mention their sense of how much they feel supported by what you're doing for them. As Clayton and Katie were talking, I was thinking about there's a white paper that StrongMind published a while back entitled "Does Your Provider Understand You?" And it just talked about the different types of online and blended and hybrid programs. Certainly, based on what Katie and Clayton were saying, it seems like StrongMind does understand the needs that iSucceed has. I wonder if you could talk about how StrongMind thinks about supporting the use of these robust data points and data sets for instructional purposes. I'm interested in that from a standpoint of how you're working with iSucceed, and to the extent that you might extend to talk about some other schools, programs, instructional models, I'd be interested in hearing that as well. And I will go to either of you to kick off this part of the discussion.
Go ahead, Jason.
Okay. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you today. One of the things that I always preface is that I think every single conversation, meeting, panel on data should be titled "Help, I Have Too Much Data." And the reason why I say that is because so many schools have so much data, and it's really about how you want to approach that data and what you need to do to drive that data. With Clayton's data, especially we work very close with Clayton, it's about the progress percent. It's about getting students to complete the course. Many online schools are like that as well. And I know that Clayton spoke a lot about that academic system part of MTSS and what they do for iSucceed to get students to that level to be successful. There's also that behavioral system, that PBIS support within MTSS that I think we do a great job here at StrongMind of providing, which is what are students actually doing? Are they logging in just on Friday for half an hour and going, that's it, I'm done? Are they logging in at 2 o'clock in the morning and teachers are scratching their head going, why are you working at 2 o'clock in the morning? What's going on? Or are they intermittently showing up for 10 minutes at a time every other day? And that's some of the things that some of the schools have really used with StrongMind data, is to create a better sense of community with parents and with students, to have those phone calls and go, hey, I noticed that you're working at 2:30 in the morning. What's going on? And it's hard for online teachers to know that Clayton may be taking care of his family and working all day, and that's the only time to support for Clayton to get on and actually do the curriculum. So StrongMind provides that data so that the teacher can have that conversation, go, oh my goodness, I don't want you working at 2:30. Let's come up with a different schedule. Can I help you with your schedule? Can we come up with some goals for you? And we've seen great success in the past with that, with just using that data to drive better conversations and facilitate a better community. Jeff put a comment, what does your student support model look like? What other resources besides teachers help with this work? So with other schools, Jeff, the counselors will use this data. They have a load of students and they'll see, hey, I have 10 students that I really need to reach out to. They're going to contact the parents, they're going to contact the students, they're going to discuss how the students are interplaying with the curriculum, when the student's getting online, when the student's submitting, what does their submission look like? Are they being successful in their submission? There's registrars that help with that. At another school, student support team that helps with that as well. Great question. So I guess to sum up, because I could go on for 2.5 hours here, and I think Clayton knows that as well. The big thing is that we do have some behavioral data, and it's completely different than a student, maybe getting into trouble in school. It's more based on their behavior of how they interact with the course. And I think that's important to note, and it's not just academic data.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. And Denise put in the chat window in response to that question also, but I'll mention it. We've got a couple of other folks from iSucceed coming on shortly, Crystal and Anna, who will be able to speak to that student support point as well. Jason, you got some accolades for your point about in the chat window, for your point about it's not about having lots of data as much as how you use it. I'm reminded over the years, just a couple of data points that have stuck out, and I've seen schools use these in really impactful ways. And I will say, every time I say them, they sound so incredibly simple. One of them goes back probably like 20 years, and so maybe some of this wasn't as clear back then as it is now. But this is a program, actually another one in Idaho, that used to provide student support Monday to Friday, not exactly school hours, but something close. And then they looked at the data and they realized there were no students asking for live help on Friday afternoon. When did they want live help? They wanted it on Sunday night. Not a surprise, right? I see Clayton and Katie laughing at this, but I can tell you that wasn't what was happening. And it took some a fairly simple look at not very complex data to come up with a real improvement there. Another one that we've seen, and this is a bit more recent, is Clayton, you talked about that need to really engage with students early on at that 0 to 29% level. And one of the things, this has actually came up at DLAC just last year, because there's always new programs coming on, especially new districts programs, and some of them were saying things like, well, yeah, we make sure to engage with students, and if they haven't logged in 3 days into the semester, then we're all over it. And the experienced people in the room saying you were 3 days too late, right? It's got to happen proactively. And again, there's the data to show that you can know if they're engaged at the start, and you can react to that. Bonnie, you know this stuff better than I do. Can you give some of your perspectives and your time working with iSucceed and maybe some of the other schools as well?
Well, yeah, I can definitely attest to how closely this school monitors their data. If anything looks off, even on the weekend, I immediately get a text message and or an email from Clayton telling us exactly what it is that doesn't look right and need to get help, because we need to get that data out to the students on Monday morning. And so, there are many times, and I never mind that, because I love how truly they are involved in the monitor of their data and just being able to know where it should be. If something doesn't look the way he thinks it should, we're going to hear about it, and we all jump in to try to figure out what has happened. My main support for this school is with their student information system and their learning management system, keeping everything not only active and working so that the students continually have access. Student access is obviously highly important in this situation, as it always would be, but for them, a day missed is a day not progressing. And so that we try to, really focus on that for them. I support them also in being able to put their data in, keeping their data straight in their student information system. And Jason's specialty is really collecting the data, retrieving the data, extracting the data. I do some of that too, but not at the level Jason does. So if, we couldn't, neither of us could support this school without the other.
No, it's Clayton is singing your praises, both Bonnie and Jason and Strongmind more generally, and it's one of the things that you're all reflecting, and Bonnie, something that you just said really made me think about this. The into it, what all four of you are talking about is the way these data points are actionable in very, very specific ways in order to be able to address specific issues. Folks, I may be having some internet issues, so I'm going off camera. I'm going to have Katie, we've got the question coming to about student support, and I wonder if you could introduce your other iSucceed folks to talk about what some of the specifics of what they're doing.
Will do. So we have a teacher and a counselor here with us from iSucceed that are going to share their perspectives on what they do with these interventions and what they do with the data. And we thought this was pretty important because oftentimes in these webinars, we have administrators and providers providing all this information of what you can do. And it's always great to see people in the field and what they're doing and those very real experiences. I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to introduce Crystal first. Crystal Sistoni is an academic counselor with us. And actually, Crystal has been part of our journey because Crystal was here when the school was run by 5 people. And then after Crystal, we'll have Anna Nelson, and she's our English department chair. And she's been with us in order to develop and fine tune what we already started. So I'll go ahead with Crystal.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. I am going to go over a couple of the many things that the counselors here do, just to highlight a few things we do. We have an eligible to graduate intervention, and we have these graduation checklists that I will be going over, and I'll just start with the checklist. Every single quarter, so this is like every 9 weeks, we are doing pretty much all the same thing all over again. So in week 6 of each quarter, every student and parent is getting an update on how many credits they have, how many credits they need, where they're at. Clayton has actually made these a bit more robust and has included information like GPA breakdowns and such, but this is such a valuable document for us as well, because it helps us with quite a few things. And so by putting that data out to them, we're able to identify missing credits. So if a student sees or a parent sees that, oh my gosh, I've taken health before, but it's not marked off, we can look back through our records, and sometimes we don't even have the health on a transcript. So it was taken over summer and it just got missed by the prior district. So, you know, by putting that data out there, we're also locating those missing credits. We also are identifying incorrect credit types. So if a student has taken a course, but maybe it was entered into the system wrong, because we're only human and there's clerical errors, then we can say, hey, look, you did take that class. It just looks like it was identified as an elective, but really it should be a humanities. And so we're able to put that together and connect those pieces and make sure that, you know, all that data is accurate. It also houses data on our citizenship exam, because in Idaho, you have to have that to graduate. So it lets us know, you know, and the parents know, hey, they've taken that, they haven't taken that. And same thing with the credits. If they've taken it and we don't have that data on file, then we're able to locate that and then add that. So that way we can just check that off their list. You know, and it really helps us engage with students and parents, because them seeing how many credits they have helps engage that, hey, let's make a graduation plan. What are we going to do this year? And so we really get great conversations started because of this, you know, information that's going out. It really helps students and parents see the big picture, pretty much where they're at, what they've done up until this point. So it's so robust and helps us with just, you know, I mentioned like 5 different things, but I'm sure there's a few other things in there that it helps us with. But it really is, I mean, I can't imagine not having them, you know, that now that we've had them. So it just really, really helps engage students and parents, you know, and maybe I made a mistake on it. And so it helps me be like, oh, they did take that class. Let me update the checklist to reflect that. So that's a really great piece. And the eligible to graduate intervention that we have as counselors is what this is each quarter we're graduating students. So students are meeting Idaho graduation requirements every 9 weeks. And so we're taking that pocket of students. Let's say, for example, we had a pocket of students graduating here in Q1. And in weeks 4 and 7, we are reaching out to those students. And we are giving kudos to those kids who are on track, passing classes, ready to go. But also it helps us engage with those students who may be struggling academically or even personally, because they're not doing so well, they're not passing their classes. And us reaching out to them, you know, engages them to tell us, hey, look, something's going on. And that actually then maybe we change paths. Maybe we do a different graduation plan and adjust it. Maybe they need a bit more time because they're dealing with, you know, a lot of personal, you know, a lot of personal things, or maybe they're working a lot. We've got a huge diverse student body, and a lot of them work. And so sometimes they work a little overboard. They might be working 60 hours and then trying to graduate and, you know, go to school full time and help their families. So we're able to get that information as we make those connections with them. We also are able to gather post high school plans, like where they're going to go to college. Are they going to go to college? Are they just going to go out into the workforce? Are they going to take a gap year? So though this intervention really, and that's probably like my favorite piece, is knowing what they're going to do after high school, or at least knowing what their plan is. We all know that that can change. So, you know, and I also, a big piece of this intervention is these kids, when we reach out to them, that's a little motivation piece. We're able to help motivate these kids that might be having those issues keeping up, or maybe they're overwhelmed. But so many times we hear from kids that like, they just don't feel heard. They don't feel cared about. Well, when we contact them and say, hey, how are you doing? You know, you're about to graduate. This is what you need. You know, this is where you're at. They are grateful and thankful because somebody cares, you know, they feel valued and heard. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard students tell me that they've never felt that before. So this intervention really helps them feel like somebody cares about them, because we do. It's just very hard in this setting sometimes to let them know without reaching out, because we can't just give them that smile in the hall. So those are, two really, really amazing things that we do here at iSucceed in the counseling department. And so, I just wanted to share those two big pieces. And I don't know if there are any questions or not, but I can type, or Anna, you can.
Yes, thank you, Crystal. I'm excited to be here to explain how data helps us connect with our students, and also our parents of those students is really a key point in the student success. Using these, I'm going to call them data habits, in online school. As I've learned them, I taught in brick and mortar when I started in education, and I wish so badly I'd had these data habits in brick and mortar as well as online, because being able to take data and then focus on a very specific group of students for a week or a couple of weeks just shows huge improvements, and we really see successful outcomes. So whether you are online or brick and mortar, having data habits helps. So I wanted to explain two interventions that we use as teachers throughout the 9 weeks of our quarter to really connect with students and parents based on the data that we were seeing. So first, the first intervention is an intervention we do as advisors, our role as advisors. And that's typically a smaller group of students than our content courses. Our advisory, maybe about 30 students, where content, you can have 120. And so with this advisory intervention, we call it our non-start intervention. And this happens week 2 of the quarter. And admin puts together a list of students based on data they have gone through that have not started any of their courses. And we, again, call it non-start. And as advisors, we either by phone call or text message, we prefer phone call, reach out to the student and the parent, letting them know, hey, we noticed you haven't started your courses. You need to start your courses right now. And I like to, although we've previously introduced ourselves to our advisory students in week 1, I really like to consider this intervention the first impression, because instead of just welcoming the students, introducing ourselves, we're helping them solve a problem. And that is really, you're setting the standard, you're setting what they can expect for the rest of the quarter and the year as their advisor, that you are here to help them be successful. With this communication, we often discover that students don't know how to log in. So we like to say it at our school, we walk them to class. And we can meet online with them, show them how to log into their courses. We discover that students maybe haven't received their Chromebook yet, and we can make a note to admin and tech that they haven't received it yet, but it's coming. But just being able to have that communication piece is really what sets these students up for success. And it also lets them know we're looking out for them. We want them to be successful from the very beginning. The second intervention is a content intervention. And this is one of my favorite interventions. It takes place the last 2 weeks of the quarter, and it's called the final intervention. And I like this because for most of our interventions, admin will put together a spreadsheet for us that really has the data already organized. This is the group you should be looking at this week. But this final intervention really requires you as a teacher to dive into your own data and your own grade books and decide what students need my help right now. And the reason I like this intervention is it allows me to prove to the students, parents, and really myself, I know my students and I know what they need. And so with this final intervention, we reach out to at least 10% of our content students. I would say most teachers in our school reach out closer to 20%. At least in my department, anytime I am looking at this intervention, teachers it's almost contagious. You just get helping students and see success and you want to help more. And with this final intervention, we are looking at students who I'd say most common would be those who are just below passing, and we want to get them to be able to pass our class. But we also have teachers who focus on students who are very close to the next grade and letting them know, if you complete this project, if you redo this discussion board, you will get this grade. It's a great opportunity for us to also share the course supports and resources as teachers we are building throughout the year that are personalized for our students. And it's again, another way just to really build that relationship with the student. Like we did with the non-start, we want you to be successful. And again, with this, we want you to be successful. So those are 2 interventions we do in our school that I have really loved, and data frames both of them.
Crystal and Anna, I mentioned this in the chat window, but because you two were talking, you may not have noticed. I love the specificity of what you're talking about, what you're suggesting, what you've been able to do. I want to throw you maybe a little bit of a curveball. I hope that's okay. I hope it's not a surprise. Well, it will be a surprise, I guess. But one of the things that we hear a lot about is the idea that in an online environment, a lot of times students are more willing to share maybe some of the challenges that they're going through. And that might be for a variety of reasons. It may be that being online gives them maybe a sense of a bit more security. Maybe they're more comfortable sharing in an online environment that they would be in a physical classroom. I wonder if you have a sense, and I'll put this to either of you, are you seeing that at all? Do you have any stories, obviously without any specific information, but I wonder if that observation resonates in your situations or not so much?
I guess I'll just speak up for my experience there. Now, it's kind of funny you asked that question, because that was actually, I remember finding out that they do. I was like, they don't even know me. They've never met me. How can they, open up? Like, how am I going to do this? Because I'm coming from a brick and mortar focused program, jumping into the online setting, no tools on how to do this through the program. But I was amazed when I started making phone calls, sending emails and text messages. Like, parents too, they just open up. I mean, maybe they've never talked to you before, and they're showing emotions such as crying even, or joy, sadness, all of the above. They might go through multiple emotions in the same conversation, but they're just telling you everything. And now it might be a little different for me as a counselor, because counselors, that's what we do, is we make those connections. We talk, we listen to, their past, where they've come from, where they are now. So, but I do find that people are much more bold in this setting. I've been and dabbled in the brick and mortar, and I feel like I got more out of a conversation over the phone with kids here than I did with somebody in my office who just would stare at me, So I do find that has literally been my experience the entire time that I've been here, is I do end up sometimes finding out too much, but they are very willing to be open. And, on the other end of that, there can be some negativity with that too, because they also can be very bold with bad things, like telling a teacher off, or, using bad language. Some parents can be very bold, because they're not with you face to face or on the phone. So, I mean, I see that both ways. I see definitely people opening up surprisingly about, their life and their story. And then definitely people using that as a gate to kind of just vent, regardless of what they're venting about.
I know I'm off camera, but I'm smiling as you're talking, Crystal. In a different situation, I was at a session with some small businesses, and the discussion was about encouraging your staff to bring their whole selves to work. And then at one point it turned into, oh no, we didn't mean that part of yourself. Oversharing can be a thing. Anna, I wonder if you had any comment on that one as well?
Yes, I
Just
do.
about connecting with, yeah, please.
I was going to say our online students come to us most often for a very specific reason. And those students are eager to share that reason with you because they want to be successful in online schooling because they haven't been successful elsewhere. And so I have found that students and parents are actually very open with why they're here and what they need. And the only time they will be hesitant is if you are hesitant to reach out. And what I like about our iSucceed culture is we are very, reaching out is just the base, like the ground that we stand on. And because of that, it allows students and parents to be more vulnerable with what they need and why they need it.
Yeah, that's so true. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Crystal, Jason, Bonnie. This has been a fantastic discussion. We are unfortunately just about out of time. I do want to go back to Clayton and Katie for a couple of final words. Clayton, I'll start with you. Any final thoughts after hearing all these folks and the very active conversation in the chat window as well?
Yeah, thanks for all of that. Yeah, two things that I would say that just has kind of occurred to me. Number one, when you are, I really believe that it's so important to focus on the academic data of your students because it's that important. But this is one thing that I know. Share that data with the students and parents as often as you possibly can. The whole reason we will see 3,000 or 4,000 lessons done over a weekend is because we shared where the students were at on a Friday morning with them and their parents, and they also know that they're going to be accounted, they're going to be held accountable on Monday morning. And so they know that. You want to share that because your families are your strongest ally. They're just like you, they're motivated to see these kids pass. They want to help them, give them the tools to do that. The last thing I would say is, we've talked a lot. Almost everything we talked about is reaching out to kids when things are not going well. But it's also so important when you have good data, also share that out, praise. At this point, 30% or more of our students every single term get perfect attendance. That means they make all their weekly lessons every single week of the term. We have 30% or more of our students that get on what we call the principal list. That means they get 3.0 or better term GPA. That's because we share that data with them and we praise them when they hit these things, and we give them and their parents a happy little email that says, you're doing great. And on a flip side, not a happy email, but when kids get when they get 0 credits, we share that with them too, because they need to know that, and they need to know that something has got to change. So I would just say share as often as possible.
They know somebody cares regardless, and it doesn't only show up when they're not doing well. So it's incredibly valuable.
The opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy. And so you have to live in that universe.
Well said. Thank you. Katie, we started with you. We'll close with you. Final thoughts?
I feel like this discussion is so important and it's so timely. And I think if I just wanted to tie it back to, using data for actionable things, I think that this discussion among educators across the nation is super important. Online, traditional, all types of schools, because we have long been in this circumstance of having things pressed upon us that probably were not meaningful or matched to what we are actually doing in schools. And this type of discussion, the data, the examples of what is actually being done in schools needs to be continuously put in front of policymakers and legislators and considerations for even program improvement. It's just super important because the nuances of education are not black and white. They're not a test score. They're not one particular number. They're comprehensive and they're real, and we're living it. whether it's online or traditional. So I think this conversation is important. And those of you participating, if you're in similar circumstances, try to get that word out, try to tell your story in the way that is meaningful for what you do.
Katie, thank you so much. Thank you to all. This has been a fantastic conversation. I believe we're going to do a version of this at DLAC in a couple of months. I can't wait to see that as well. For everybody who's on, you see the contact information up there. You'll be getting the webinar recording as well. So if you're interested in any follow-up, you have those opportunities here. iSucceed folks, thank you again for taking the time today to share what you've been doing with folks around the country. Strong Mind folks, thanks for being on. Thanks for creating this opportunity for the webinar. And we look forward to re-engaging with all of you at future sessions. Thanks so much.